All right, brother. Well, welcome. Welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to talk to you today. And welcome back to everyone listening. This is the Growing Money with Sean Trace podcast. And I've got a really awesome guest with me today. Now, would you like to tell people a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Sean. I'm Nate Hoskin. I spend some of my time as a financial advisor. I spend some of my time as a digital marketer. But at the end of the day, the thing that I'm super, super passionate about is just educating people about money. So
Hell yeah.
regardless of how I'm spending my days, that's the North Star.
Right. I got to talk to some really cool people because my last episode that I had go up, it was an episode and we talked a lot about the psychology of money. And, you growing up and people learn about, budgeting and, it's like, I always love to think about physical fitness. People grow up learning about a sport. You ever hear that thing where there was this one thing in sports that I heard a long time ago where they were talking about the psychology of sports, and they'd get a great NBA player or football player, and the guy would go out and they would see it with some of these guys that these guys were, a guy would win the Heisman Trophy, guy would be like the next great thing, and then he got on the field to the NFL and just failed. It was just like everything was right. The package was there. And you look at it there was a great movie that I absolutely love called Moneyball with Brad Pitt.
Oh, yeah.
One of Brad Pitt's best movies. Jonah Hill's in there too. And they were talking about Brad Pitt's character, Billy Bean, was supposed to be the next best great player. And like that's when he asked the kid, there's this one line where he's talking to this kid and he's like, "Would you draft me?" And the kid's like, "Nah, man, I wouldn't." And the guy's like, "All right, you're hired." Because there's more to it than just everything looking right on paper. And with finance, there's so much about money that's not just numbers and dollars and cents. There's more to it. What was it that inspired and got you into this, man?
Yeah, there are a lot of moving pieces in that answer, and I want to touch on Moneyball really quickly before I hop into it because I think it's the perfect comparison to finance, because really what Jonah Hill's character was pushing was that we shouldn't go for the all-stars. We shouldn't go for the people who are knocking it out of the park, quite literally. We just need people who can get on base.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's a mindset shift around money where it's like, I'm not gonna be the next star. I don't need to be. I just need to get on base every single time. And if I can practice that consistency, that's where I'm going to see a crazy amount of success. And I really saw that when I was looking at my uncle, who was really my career idol in my childhood. And I think when I was 6 or 7, I saw the Porsche and I saw the fancy house and I saw the tennis courts. And I said, whatever he's doing, flying business class, that's what I want. But he died of cancer at the age of 54. And so he didn't get to take money out of his 401k. He didn't get to really live all of that beauty that he had created for himself. He spent his entire life working and didn't really get to reap the rewards in the way that I'm sure he had hoped that he could. And so for me, that was the trigger to get me out of the more quantitative side of money, the quantitative finance, the modeling, the coding, and into the human side of money. Because money is as much a behavioral and an emotional aspect of our lives as it is a tangible, holdable piece. And that was really the thing that kicked me into, okay, it's not about making people more money. It's not about making everyone rich. It's about helping people make good decisions with what they have. And that really focused my vision or my intention in a really powerful way.
That's huge, man. Because we had talked about, like, before we had a pre-conversation about having you on the podcast, and we had this conversation about a little bit about some of these things. And one of the things that you were talking about is not saving too much, because there's this idea, like, you think about that. I I remember this. I had this one house with an avocado tree, and in the backyard. And in the beginning, there was a squirrel that lived in that avocado tree. And when those avocados became ripe, he was, first of all, at the beginning of the year, he was just this thin little normal squirrel. But at the end of the year, dude was just jacked. It was the
Huge. Yeah.
biggest squirrel. He was huge, man. This squirrel, like, he didn't realize he was eating so much. And like, there was so much abundance that this squirrel was just packing it on, and he didn't realize there was more there, and and maybe not the greatest analogy, but it cracks me up because people will be, sometimes you get people that are so focused on saving things. I love my mother-in-law and father-in-law, but they hoard stuff, man. They're true hoarders, and there's a reason why. They grew up in Vietnam in the middle of the Vietnam War. When scarcity was a big deal, when anything that you had could be, valuable asset, could be traded. Hey, I've got steel. You need steel for something? I can trade you. This is good steel. So we downstairs have a room that is filled with stuff. And what's ironic is that that space could be doing something. It could be creating something, it could be an office space. It could be a workspace for video editors that I have. It could be, someone could have a small coffee shop out of that space, but instead we have old ashtrays, like trash can combos, like that you would see in a hotel where it's the trash
Oh,
can
yeah.
and they got the sand on top for the, that's an ashtray. We've got like 12 of those stacked in a bathroom. And it's pointless, and it's really pointless at this point in time. And, and I talked to my father-in-law. I was like, why don't we get rid of those? And he's like, they're steel. And I'm just like, I get it. But, that same space could be doing something. To me, it's like, and then again, we were talking about this. And you see the people that save all their lives, and then they don't have that chance. I had one guest come on who had their significant other recently pass, and he said, we've been saving and saving and saving, and we never got to spend our savings because my significant other passed. And he's like, now I want to live. I want to go out, and I'm going to be spending some of this money that we saved up, because what's the point in saving it all if you don't have joy, if you can't use it? I mean, and so there's this balance between, people being, YOLO versus, actually having a plan that you incorporates enjoying life as part of your plan.
Yeah. I'm 100% with you. And I think that avocado tree analogy is a really interesting one because, on one side, yeah, you can just eat and eat and eat and eat. And then you're just kind of a really fat squirrel. But then you're going to be super skinny by the next season when the avocados come back.
Yeah.
And so there is a benefit. Let's maybe use like an orange tree or an apple tree as the
Yeah.
example, because I don't think avocados keep super well if you put them in a can.
No, definitely not.
But if you eat most of the apples and you set a couple aside, just enough so that you can have plenty until you go back to the next season and harvest, then you can create this balance. But if you take all of the apples and you can them and you keep them, you're not going to actually enjoy the harvest in any way. You're still going to be skinny when you make it to the next season because you weren't willing to eat when the food was fresh. And so there's this back and forth where you need to have a little bit to get you through those hard times, but you don't need all of it. And for me, this idea of saving too much money is really around training. You were talking
Yeah.
about physical training a little bit. And it's this idea that whatever you do is training your habits. And for whatever reason, people assume that the moment they retire, they are suddenly going to be okay with spending money after they spent 40 years training themselves that spending money was bad.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, maybe you actually need to train yourself a little bit to spend money. Maybe you need to get good at spending money, because not all spending is created equal, right?
Right.
You can spend money frivolously, and you can spend money in really impactful ways that create memories for you and your family while you have them next to you. And so spending money is a skill, just
Yeah.
like saving money is. And my argument is that you have to train both.
Yeah. I just went back to the US, and I bought a new computer for one of my editors. And it was a smart buy. I did my research. It was like a year and a half old. It was like a 2000 a Mac M2 Pro. It was marked down to $500, and I was just like, dude, that's smart, So there's this thing to be said for being smart with it. But one of the things that when you were talking, I was reminded of, I studied Chinese medicine. Like, actually, acupuncture and Chinese medicine was what I did my graduate degree in. I stepped back from it, but right now, I've been finishing on the side, just finishing up some of my degree. And one of the core concepts of Chinese medicine is this idea of yin and yang, the idea of this thing, this balance, this structure of balance that the whole universe exists in. And if you go too far this way, it's not good. And if you go too far this way, it's also not good. There is this sweet spot where these things change into each other, and an understanding that there's always this drift between the two sides. Sometimes you drift into lack, and that's okay. But you just got to be aware of where you're at, and then kind of bring things back to abundance, And so it's like this space where certainly we have all been to that place of where we spend too much. But there's also the other side where you swing back to this side, and that space where you're doing too little, And it's like life is about balance. And we're not really good at it. That's the thing. Like, I've got this thing where I have this, when I have a food that's like, because I've had really bad food allergies for a long time. And one of the cool things is that those have started to go away, and I'm able to eat more
Nice.
foods again. So it's really awesome. It was just stable, taking a long time approach to it, and things kind of mellowed out. But there's always the danger where I'll be like, dude, I can eat garlic again. Okay, let's do it. And I just, will put like 20 cloves of garlic on a thing, and I'd be like, all right, now we're going to have some garlic. And it gets too much, but it's like, again, it's about finding that balance. But what advice would you give to someone who's afraid to spend because they were raised with that scarcity mindset?
Yeah, it's a challenging thing because that scarcity mindset can come from so many different events, right?
Right.
I mean, you were talking about living in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. True scarcity. Not, I never had money for like the little things in life. I could never buy the Pez dispenser when I was 6, therefore I have a scarcity mindset, versus if I don't collect, I will not survive tomorrow. But really, my advice for someone dealing with a scarcity mindset is that if you are saving money just as much as you possibly can out of that scarcity mindset, you're probably not getting the most out of that money, because scarcity mindset has two effects on the way that you treat your money.
Yeah.
Yes, there's the side that it keeps you from spending, but more and more I see that it changes how people invest.
Yeah.
And so now, if you have a scarcity mindset, you have this avocado tree, but you picked all the avocados and you just left them in the garage. When you come back to those avocados, those things that you kept because you were afraid to eat them in that moment, they're going to be rotten and inedible. And in finance, we just call that inflation. It's that
Right.
slow degrading of your buying power. That's the mold on that one avocado that starts to spread to all the others. And so someone is totally allowed to have the scarcity mindset. In many ways, it's a superpower, because life does get hard, and having resources when life is hard makes life a whole lot easier.
100%.
But if you are storing those resources, you have to make sure that you're storing those resources in a way that actually works for you. Otherwise, you're going to come back and you won't actually be able to reap what you sow.
I remember that my friend's dad was in was a combat soldier a long time ago. I don't remember which war he was in, but he was carrying some local currency in his sock, and he was out on patrol. Things got wet, and he came back, and the money was not, really linen or cotton based. It just had dissolved, and he was like always after that, he's like, you know what? I'm always really careful where I put my money. And his entire life, he was very careful when he invested, because it was like for him, it was such a profound experience to see, you know, this paper thing is not worth that much, and
Yeah.
and with inflation, we see that right now where you see people that were making this much and it's painfully less now, because of inflation. Um, but you start looking at how do you personally decide when it's time to enjoy some of your money versus when to tuck it away for the future? How do you make that distinction?
Yeah. I would say most of the time I use the multiplier rule. So the multiplier rule is based on the rule of 72. Are you familiar?
No, I want to hear this, man.
Okay. So this will be great for everyone listening too. So the rule of 72 is the idea that you take the number 72 and you divide it by whatever percentage you can earn on your money. So let's say you're going to get 10% on your money. Take 72 and divide it by 10. It's going to take 7.2 years for your money to double at that interest rate. Divide it by 4, divide it by 5, pick your number, whatever it happens to be. If you take 72 and divide it by that, that's how long it takes for your money to double. So let's use 10% because it's easy. Your money's going to double every 7.2 years. So you pretty reasonably have 5 doubling events over a 35-year period. So in that case, a dollar today is essentially worth $64 35 years from now. So that's how I measure the opportunity cost of buying something. You want to buy a $10 burrito? It's not a $10 burrito, it's a $640 burrito. And I have purchased plenty of $640 burritos because
Wow.
it's not about saying like, "Oh, I should always be saving money." It's about measuring value over price. How valuable is this thing that I'm buying? And rather than just giving it the price test, in which case a lot of things are cheap. There are plenty of $5 things you can order on Amazon that have the price of $5 and a value of 0. And so it's just a multiplier I use where I'm like, okay, if I really want this burrito, it's a $640 burrito. You do a 15-mile hike, you come down, that's the best burrito you're ever going to eat. It's worth its weight in gold. But ordering DoorDash and paying that $10 delivery fee, that $640 delivery fee, that value is not equal to the opportunity cost for me. And so I'm like, great, I will take that money and I physically take $10 and I put it into my brokerage account. I will do the transfer in the moment and then I will get in my car and I will drive and go pick up my food. And so it's just a test. Is now a moment where I want to spend this money? Is it truly valuable to me? And if not, fine. My default is always that I will save it instead.
That's awesome. And you don't think about that, Like my daughter, Daddy, can I buy this video game skin? Something that's absolutely unnecessary, like a new skin for her character. And I'm like, that skin's $5. I was like, okay, well, $5 now. I didn't even think about like what that would multiply out to. That's absolutely a massive cost, And if I tell her,
Yeah.
well, Daddy, it's only $5. Well, no, it's actually this much money. Like that's a heck of a perspective. And you don't think about that because we're thinking about, right now, what it is right now, but the potential to earn on that is so huge. And oh man, that's a mindset shift I got to kind of lean into myself.
Yeah. Well, and
That's awesome.
it's so cool when you start to add in the other variable, which is not just, is this going to make me feel good? It's also, is this going to make me better at whatever my vocation or passion is? So
Yeah.
maybe that's about making money for you, but maybe that's about being a better father. Maybe that's about being a better spouse, something like that. Those investments are so incredibly valuable that they're worth it regardless of what math you want to do. And so that's where I'm always willing to spend. Those are the types of investments that always pass the test. Because you
That's
zoom
awesome.
out and you're like, you're going to buy a plane ticket for $1,000. No, it's $6,400. Like, I don't know if I can do that. Or it's $64,000. I don't know if I can actually make that justification in my head. And I always do because I know that those are the things I'm going to remember. So that's where people always get mixed up when they hear me say this. They're like, oh, well, by that math, I should never spend any money ever. No, the goal is just to measure the value of what you're buying more effectively.
That's actually beautiful because like when you said that immediately, I was going toward, okay, I shouldn't spend any money, but you're right. For my daughter, those skins are probably not valuable, but we just went back to visit grandma in Maui. And that was, standing there on the beach, having those moments together. She will always remember being able to go on this whale watching adventure where we got to watch humpback whales swim around our boat. Like that's the type of stuff that's worth it. That's the type of thing that, my 8-year-old daughter is like, dude, that's one of those core memories that's going in. And it's worth the cost. It's worth the trade-off. Let me ask you this. What's an experience that you're glad that you spent money on that others might have considered kind of irresponsible?
Oh, there are plenty.
Yeah.
Um, I think the biggest one for me is that I had zero money. I was a junior in high school and I paid to go spend 3 months in Madagascar.
That sounds
And
rad.
it was a moment where I maybe could have been focusing a little bit more on my sports. I could have been applying to college. Like I was right in that transitional phase where I had plenty of things that I probably should have been doing that would have pushed me forward productivity wise or career wise, could have maybe set me up better. And I remember when I was going to go do it, my parents were luckily really supportive and they were like,
Yeah.
okay, like we'll help you with this, we'll enable this. But there were a number of people in my life, particularly my teachers, because I was sort of I always had like the gifted kid problem
Yeah.
where once you get a couple of A's, everyone's like, why'd you get a B? It's like, okay,
Right?
I don't know if I need to explain myself here. So there were plenty of people in my life who were like, but you're really good at this sport. I was a Nordic skier. Like you should go and do the summer training instead. You could go to nationals. You could really set yourself up for this season. Or maybe you should go and tour more colleges to really figure out which professors are going to make the most sense for you in the next step of your life. And I had to tell them, no, I think this is going to make the most sense for me. And it was by a mile. Like the learnings I took from being in a coastal village in Madagascar will never be taught in a college. Like there is no
100%.
professor that could ever mirror that type of experience. But I had to defend my decision and sometimes I still do. So,
You know, there was there have been 2 jobs in the past 3 years that were in the US. One was for one of the top 3 podcasters in the US wanted me to come back and run their post-production team, the whole production team. And I sat there and I thought about my family, and I just didn't want to move my family to where that was at. And it was not a head situation. It was not a financially would have been a great move, would have been a really smart move. But I kind of made a heart decision, and it was like one of those things. And then just recently, 2 months ago, I had this opportunity to go back for another job. And last night I was telling my wife, I was like, hey, this is, we were at this red carpet event. It was actually last night we got to go to the red carpet for the new Mission Impossible premiere for here in Vietnam, which was rad. Mission
nice.
Impossible is a
Yeah,
great
that's
movie.
great.
Go see it. But I was sitting there looking at my wife and she's like, what's up? And I said, you know what? I would have been gone right now. And I had plugged all of these options into things like ChatGPT. And every time it was like, going is the smartest option. It is all what you should do. And then I sat there and I said, but it forgot about something else. And she's like, what's that? I said, there's heart to these things. There's these decisions often involve us making a decision that's not rational, but yet it is something that we can justify on the other side. And I don't know. It sometimes things are not as clear. And this leads to there's a group of people that are probably wanting to burn down my podcast right now. The FIRE community, quite literally, FIRE, financially independent and retire early crowd who might see spending now as a missed opportunity later. Like, how do we respond to these people that go, you're an idiot, Sean, you should have taken that opportunity, making a decision this way isn't it, stupid. Like, how do you respond to the people who just can't see this?
Yeah, I mean, they're right. Spending now is a missed opportunity later.
100%.
That's that's that rule of 72, the 64 multiplier, all of those different things that you can apply. Those are tenets from sort of the FIRE doctrine.
Yeah.
Like that's how they've been trained to think about money, and I would assume that that was actually a very familiar exercise to them because it's very, very common on FIRE Reddit threads and YouTube videos, that sort of thing. And they're totally right. It is a missed opportunity to spend money right now. The question is, which opportunity do you prefer? Because there is a chance that you could go and you could do a trip with your wife or with your spouse or your partner right now that you guys would remember forever. Or you can buckle down, eat beans and rice, save that money, and do the exact same trip 20 years from now in an all-inclusive resort.
Right.
But it might just be you.
Yeah.
Like they might not be here. Or you might have kids. I think that's what people discount massively is the complication of life as you get older. And there
Yeah.
is this belief for whatever reason that down the road you'll be in a lower tax bracket. Down the road life will be simpler. Shoot me an email 2 weeks from now because life will totally have calmed down 2 weeks from now. It's like, really? You think that life gets easier from here? And for all reasons, I hope that it does for everyone listening. But at the end of the day, the current moment is pretty much always the best moment to have an experience. And
100%.
the question is just, what conversation are you having with your future self?
Did
And
you ever?
I actually, yeah,
Sorry. So please
go for
continue,
it.
brother. No, no, no. All you.
Uh, you you mentioned ChatGPT, and I've been having a lot of fun just throwing together prompts and playing around and experimenting with the tech because it's really cool. Like it's just a new
Yeah.
opportunity that exists. And I created a prompt that I can share with you that essentially takes the user through 5 questions. And the questions are different every time. It's all based on your answers. But the goal of the exercise is to name money's role in your life.
Oh wow.
So for some people, it's an assistant. It just helps you do things. But for other people, like for me, my classification or what it told me was that money is a mistress.
Interesting.
Always kind of diving into my life and creating all of this opulence, but then receding. And so there's this feeling of this toxic relationship at all
Mm,
times. And so I think for a lot of people in the FIRE community, money is a ghost.
ah,
It's this thing that is not quite tangible. It doesn't feel like they could ever have enough of it. They're collecting ether essentially and hoping that that's going to equate to something tangible later on. So that's something that I would encourage anyone to do. They don't have to use my prompt if they don't want to, but just understanding what role money plays in their life is so important to then understand how you should use money.
yeah.
Because if money is scarce, if money is a ghost, then maybe you use it differently than if money is a friend, right?
Right.
So that's a thought.
I was showing my daughter. We're doing. I'm trying to teach her about money as we go, and we were looking
Mhm.
at. We had this one great book that talks about money for kids, and it was talking about, well, what is money? And it looked at paper money and different types of currency through the years. And one of the things that was like, we were looking at wampum belts, those belts that they used to have.
Yeah.
Manhattan was bought, with some shells. Well, actually, it was these belts that were sewn together, and they were beautifully ornate belts that were leather and shells sewn together. And when we looked at that, it was something that you could hold. It was tangible. There was work that went into the craftsmanship. There was the time that was invested in that. There was stuff. It was tangible, and back in the barter economy, things were tangible. I've got a horse. You've got a saddle, well, how many, saddles does it take to equate to a horse or vice versa? And, the but then so much now, like went to the store the other day and scanned a QR code, money came straight out. It was no, or people that go and just tap the phone. And it was like, it is really we're getting more and more and more into this place where money is so non-tangible that people forget that, and they live in this world of possibilities. Did you ever see the movie Secret Life of Walter Mitty? Probably my
I have
favorite.
not.
Dude, it's like one of my favorite Ben's.
I'll go
You
watch it.
have you have to go
Absolutely.
watch it. One of the best Ben Stiller movies ever. It's kind of like not a true comedy role. Ben Stiller, Sean Penn, and I can tell you some of it without giving away the story. Uh, Ben Stiller is working at this magazine that's all about photos. And he was the guy who collected the negatives, like the film negatives from this one famous photographer. And the guy sends this, film negative to him, but it gets misplaced. So Walter Mitty decides to go on this adventure to try to find and track down this photographer wherever he's at in the world to find out where this film was at. And this guy who's been living through other people's pictures goes on an adventure and lives his own adventure. He's jumping out of helicopters, he's swimming in the ocean, he's seeing snow leopards in the Himalaya, and it's just suddenly like there's this experience that he's going on and he's able to see life. And not to say that you can't from the fire method or any other method, but there's something to be said for are you living? Are you living or are you just thinking about living? Because I mean, you can save money and live. Like you can spend money and not live. You know what I mean? So it's not like, there's all this space, but it's like at the same time, at the end of the day, and I think it again, like so many of my guests talk about, it's about your values. Like what's really important to you? Because at the end of the day, that's the secret here. If you're a travel person, then finding ways to finance that while also putting money into savings and preparing for the future is going to be really important. You know, if you're doing that and you're putting that money into travel, then you're probably going to cut back on the Star Wars memorabilia or whatever it is, the other thing that is your thing. But if you're the Star Wars memorabilia guy, man, own that. Be cool with that. And just understand that, that's your thing. And to find out that that's something that you value. And doesn't mean that it's going to be what someone else values. So just what
Yeah.
popped in my
I've
head.
I've always I've always thought about that values idea, that the way you treat money, the way you treat anything is all about your values. And I've always wondered, like, what do the values dictate, right?
Yeah.
So you hold your values, and then what do you use your values to make decisions on? And the answer I've come up with for myself is that the values dictate your percentages.
Mm.
So your percentages applied to anything in a very tangible scope, it's the percentage of money that you save versus the percentage of money that you spend. If your values are more towards wealth or towards future security, something along those lines, it adjusts the percentage that you save. And some people ratchet that up to 50% or 60% of their income and then call themselves members of FIRE. But really, it's about how are your values dictating your percentages? But people stop there. Instead of thinking about how your values dictate your percentages in your life. Because let's say you take the more traditional FIRE route and you have 0 to 50, like ages 0 to 50, where you are just working and you're just saving. And then from 50 onward, let's say you live to average age 74, something like that. Like that would be, let's take that out to 80 just to give a little bit extra. It's like, okay, then the hope there is that you got to spend a little less than a half of your life really doing what you want to do. So the question is then, what's a different way to spend at least half of your life doing what you want to do? Maybe it just adjusts those percentages. And so for me, that's always how I've treated my day to day, is that I just want to spend half of my day doing things that I love to do,
I
because
love
we
that.
spend our life the way we spend our days, right? I think the quote is technically, the way we spend our days is the way we spend our life. And that to me is just a matter of percentages, and your values dictate those.
There was a a guy that I saw on Instagram. I don't remember who he is, but he's really cool self help guy, kind of like a hippie surfer type. And he was like talking about how he talks about taking 8 mini adventures a year. It doesn't have to be expensive. And he's
Yep.
like, you get these 8 mini adventures a year because at the end of the year, you've got these 8 things that you've done. And they're dramatic and there's stuff that you can, and he's like, and you think about that. You live an average of this many years. And he's like, those 8 things become just this mountain of cool stuff that you've done. And like for him, he's like, and that could be, learning to ride a horse or, you know, uh, going backpacking somewhere, whatever it might be. It just, but you add it up, and those are things that are tangible. And so to me, it's like, yeah, I hear what you're saying, man, and it's powerful.
It is. It really is. What else you got?
One of the other things that you were talking about this was talking about side hustles and like kind of like the 10% entrepreneur mindset, and because I was talking to someone about this the other day and they had this, a friend came to me and said, hey, I've got this thing that I've been doing, but I'm really scared about doing it because if I do this thing full time, I don't know how to make it work. And so, like that. So we were talking in the conversation, and you said that a side hustle earning 1 or 2 thousand can change your life because if that's a side hustle and you get 2 grand extra a month, that's nice. That's really helpful. But if it's your main gig and you're getting 2 grand a month, you know, that's stressful.
Yeah, dollars are not created equal.
No.
The first dollar you earn is already spoken for. For many
Yeah.
people, the $5,000 they earn is already spoken for. Maybe for some it goes up to the 15,000th. But that next dollar above wherever your line is,
Yeah.
that dollar I would argue is 100 times more valuable than the first dollar you earned because it's yours. You get to
Right.
choose. And so having a side hustle that can produce $1,000 a month above whatever it is that you're doing for your regular job, you're working a 9 to 5, you're a contractor, whatever it is, that is life changing
Yeah.
because so many people struggle to save $1,000 a month. Like that's a lot of money. But if
Yeah.
you could just do that and spend all of your paycheck, that's a whole different lifestyle than just working your 9 to 5. Whereas, yeah, if you went out on your own and took the full leap and you're 9 to 5 now, or you're 24/7, like most entrepreneurs live, is paying you $2,000 a month, that's a much worse lifestyle than you had.
Right. What are some, like people building their side hustles? How do you balance it so that it's not draining away your energy though, too? What are some signs that like the side hustle is becoming more of a burden than a blessing? How do you know if this is the right thing or if it's just like a waste of time?
Yeah. I love video games, have ever since I was a kid. And I've always treated side hustles like video games.
I love that.
And there's a little bit more to that about how to make a side hustle not feel draining, but also how to make a side hustle successful. But really, I would say that a side hustle becomes draining the same way a video game does. Like the moment you would put down a video game is the moment you would get a little bit burnt out on a side hustle because it's just a little too much repetition. There's not enough interesting stuff happening. It takes too much time to actually get to whatever reward it is that you're seeking. Those are all things that I think kill side hustles for people. And so I would argue that side hustles are exercises in efficiency because it's not supposed to be another 9 to 5. It's
Yeah.
supposed to be this thing that you put a small amount of effort in and get a smaller result. And I think that the way I balance a side hustle is saying this is not going to be a $10,000 a month or a $50,000 a month side hustle. It's just supposed to be $1,000 a month.
Mm.
And so people talk about, like, have you heard about the 10x rule?
No.
Like, I hate the self-help thing where it's like it's easier to make $1 million a month than it is to make $1 million a year. I'm like, what world are you living in where that's the case? Because I have not found that to be true. But I understand the mantra behind it, which is you might as well look at 10xing something, because then if you only 5x it, you still came out ahead of where you wanted to be. But that takes an insane amount of effort, and that's what a lot of people try to do with side hustles. Instead, what is the bare minimum amount of effort I can put in to reach my bare minimum goal? So what is the bare minimum amount of effort I can put in to make $1,000 a month, rather than putting in all of this effort to try to make $10,000 a month, when really all you need to make this side hustle worth it is 1,000.
I love that. That's powerful, man, because it's like, you're right. People aim for something that you don't always have to aim. I My wife is awesome, rad, and gets me into places that I wouldn't normally be allowed to go into. So I got to sit at the front row of a couple fashion shows this last week, and I was a fish out of water. Though that being said, the reels that we're posting the next couple days are pretty funny. Got some great content out of it, which made me happy. And
Nice.
first of all, I was just sitting in the front row doing my Zoolander faces. So, and I was asking my wife what her modeling face would be. So, not many people can say that they went to a fashion show, got to sit in the front row, and practice their modeling faces. Needless to say, my modeling face is pretty horrible. But one of the things that was happening that was funny, and it's kind of a tangent, but I still thought it was interesting. Sometimes you can aim too high, and like there was this one guy that suddenly sat down in the front row, and I don't feel like I'm supposed to be in the front row, but I looked over and I was like, that guy is definitely going to get asked to get moved in about 3 seconds. And he's just out there. He's like, ain't no one going to know. I'm up here. And 2 seconds later, they were like, who are you? And what are you doing here? And they kicked him out. And I was like, what struck me is like, incremental steps are powerful. Incremental steps can level up your game if you do them every day. I remember when I was in college, high school, I wanted to play more sports. So I went to the coach and I said, "Hey coach, I want to play basketball." And he's like, "All right, cool. Show up here tomorrow." I showed up. He's like, "See this ball? Put it in that hoop." And I was like, "Okay." He's like, "Do it 100 times." And I was shooting and I really sucked. And it was going the wrong way. And on that day, I think I was able to after an hour, I was maybe got 10 shots in. And embarrassing to say, it was bad. But I kept showing up. He's like, "Come tomorrow, come tomorrow, come tomorrow." I kept coming, kept coming, kept coming. And slowly but steadily, I started getting better at putting the ball in the hoop. Still couldn't play basketball for anything. But if I said, "Hey, coach, how do I get on the team?" That's not the goal I should have had. The goal I should have had should have been like, how do I dribble the ball? And it's like, because if you can level up one step at a time, so, you're sitting there and like, and certainly the fundamentals are there. I sit there and I was watching Mission Impossible and like Tom Cruise walking on the wings of a biplane. And I mean, I'm not giving anything away. That's been all in the trailers. Dude, it's unreal, man. Unreal, the stuff that guy did. And then I was reading up. My wife was like, how in the hell did they film this? And I was reading, and it was like Tom has been preparing for this for like 10 years. The dude has known he's wanted to do this stunt. He's been building up to it for 10 years, slowly but steadily learning to fly. He already learned how to fly other planes, and he was like, how do I fly a biplane? And then then a year and a half solid of doing wing walking, like, which used to be a big thing. Back in the 1920s, it was a stunt. They would have people standing on top of it. And Tom just is relentless, and he took it step by step. But what was powerful is I think one of the things that's powerful with side hustles is that you don't have to win big on your first day. You can get, so you do this one skill, you get one client. Well, that's one client you didn't have yesterday. That's one step forward toward a bigger goal that you didn't have, and then you keep hammering and eventually you get there. Now, let me ask you this. Do you think every 9 to 5 worker should start a side hustle, or are there cases where it's better to focus all in on your day job?
I think side hustles can get really exhausting really, really quickly. I don't think that they're for everyone, but I would also make the argument that a 9 to 5 is a really bad place to spend extra time.
Yeah.
Because let's say you make 100 grand a year and you work an extra 5 hours a week, which would be pretty easy to do, right? You show up a half hour early, you leave a half hour late. That is what I would consider to be like the show up for your company type of argument. And so you work an extra 5 hours, you do that over 52 weeks, you're pretty close to 250 extra hours a year, right? And okay, so you did that. And now you got a 3% raise, which is pretty typical across the board. So you made an extra 3,000 bucks. What was your hourly for that extra 250? Is that 12 bucks an hour? Something like that? Like, I'm doing math in my head, so maybe I'm just butchering this, but I'm pretty sure it's close. I'm pretty sure it's close to about 12 bucks an hour for that extra time that you put into your 9 to 5. And maybe it does get you a promotion. Maybe it does get you an extra $12,000 a year or something like that. But in most cases, at least from what I've seen with the clients that I work with, the extra time that they put into their 9 to 5 is wasted. And so my argument would be either put in the normal 40 at the 9 to 5 and spend those additional hours creating a life that you love, spending it with your spouse, spending it with your kids, spending it with your friends, going on adventures, going on walks with a dog, whatever it happens to be. That is an unsung side hustle right there.
Yeah.
Like, having a side hustle where you just live as a happy human, that's probably
Right.
the best side hustle you can have.
Right.
And if you have a little more go in you and you really want to earn a little extra, or you want to hit a savings goal, or you want to achieve something financially, I would argue that a side hustle is higher leverage than spending extra time at a 9 to 5.
I like that. Well, let me ask you one last question to finish up today. What mindset shift has helped you the most in life and business?
Oh, that's easy. Generosity is the most profitable thing ever. And in order to make that make sense, I have to define both generosity and profit. So, generosity is giving to someone where there is no expectation of getting something back, but also there is no expectation of receiving something on the other side, right? If someone asks you for something and you give it to them, it's far less generous. Like, if someone says, "Give me this gift," and you give them that gift, is that gift generous? And so generosity has a very tight definition where you are giving to someone who did not expect to receive that thing and you are expecting nothing in return. And then profit is not the definition people normally assign to it, which is, I will make money. Specifically, I will make money off of that act of generosity.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that that's not the case. The definition of profit is the idea that you receive something that is more valuable than what you put into it, right? In business, we call it profit when you pay X amount of money to fulfill an order and you charge a little bit extra on top. That's your profit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in real life, you might give a gift simply for the sake of giving a gift that wasn't asked for and you expect nothing in return. But then, just like what happened with me, you show up 2 weeks later and you have dinner with that person and they say, "Hey, we really need to get our vents cleaned in our house, right? We need to get our air ducts cleaned. What if we go in on it together and see if we can get a bulk deal?" And so we
Mm-hmm.
got 5 neighbors together and we all went to the same person and said, "Hey, we want you to come and do 5 projects. They're all right next door. So you'd only have to have someone drive once to do all of these projects in a day. Can we get a discount?" So I didn't really profit. I made zero money off of the person that I gave the gift to. I certainly did not profit off of my neighbor. I just created a situation where I got more value than the thing that I gave. The value of the gift was not equivalent to the discount I got on that project, right? So I technically profited, but I didn't profit off of them and I didn't profit off of the gift.
One of my last guests that came on was talking about the science behind giving and the
Mm,
the way that it helps people feel And they showed that, like, if you give people money to give to someone else, I mean, certainly, there is that what goes around comes around, but they showed that the real joy was in this giving, that people found more joy in giving than almost anything else, which is so powerful as well. But like, one of the things that I think that we forget about so often is that there, in the relationships, there is so much equity in relationships that is not tangible. You can't sit there and go, well, how valuable is this relationship? But living in Asia, one of the things that I'm constantly made aware of is that relationships are a currency in and of themselves, and that having relationships that are, and that's not the relationship that's being exploited or used, or it's not some manipulated thing. It's just there's an awareness that there's a currency in the people that you interact with, and connecting with people. It's
Yeah.
powerful.
And that's what makes you rich.
That's what makes you rich, man.